Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you for a moment because there's something powerful that happens when a man can't stop thinking about a woman, and I don't mean thinking about her casually. I don't mean a late night thought that fades by morning. I'm talking about when she gets in his mind and refuses to leave, when she shows up in his quiet moments, when she becomes the thought behind his silence. When a man's focus changes, his entire world starts shifting in ways even he doesn't fully understand. See, focus is not something a man gives lightly. A man can desire many things, admire many women, be attracted to beauty everywhere he looks, but focus is different. Focus is intentional, and when it locks onto one woman, it reveals where his heart is quietly settling. When a man can't stop thinking about a woman, his attention begins to drift toward her without effort. He doesn't plan it. It just happens. His mind starts replaying conversations, remembering her expressions, wondering what she's doing, how she's feeling, and whether she's okay. Even when he's busy, even when life is loud, there she is, sitting in the background of his thoughts like a constant signal he can't turn off. A focused man starts making decisions differently. He may not announce it. He may not even admit it to himself at first. But suddenly he's more careful with his time. He starts choosing peace over chaos, meaning over momentary pleasure. The things that once distracted him don't hold the same power because his attention has found something that feels deeper, calmer, and more real. That's how you know it's serious. When the noise of the world fades and one woman's presence becomes louder than everything else combined. That kind of focus doesn't come from lust, it comes from connection. When a man is focused on a woman, his discipline increases. He starts holding himself to a higher standard, not because she demanded it, but because her existence in his life inspires it. He wants to be sharper, better, more stable. He doesn't want to disappoint her, even if she never asked for anything. Focus creates accountability, and accountability creates growth. A man who once moved carelessly begins to move with intention. His actions become measured. His words carry more weight. He becomes more aware of how he shows up because now someone important is watching, even if she's not in the room. Focus also exposes vulnerability. When a man's attention belongs to one woman, he starts noticing how much her reactions matter to him. Her approval feels different. Her disappointment hits harder. Her smile stays with him longer than he expects. That's when he realizes she has access to parts of him he didn't plan on opening. And that realization can be unsettling because focus creates attachment, and attachment creates emotional risk. But here's the truth. Men don't focus on what they don't value. If his mind keeps returning to her, it's because she represents something his soul recognizes as rare. A focused man becomes protective, not possessive, but protective. He guards the connection because he understands its value. He doesn't want interference, confusion, or careless mistakes ruining something that feels meaningful. His focus sharpens his instincts. He becomes more patient, more observant, more intentional in how he interacts with her. That's how you know a man is no longer just interested, he's invested. Because when a man's focus belongs to a woman, his heart has already followed, and everything he does from that point forward begins to reflect it. When a man becomes emotionally attached to a woman, his inner world begins to change in ways he never planned and rarely admits out loud. Emotional attachment is not loud for a man. It's quiet, private, and deeply personal. It starts the moment her presence affects his peace. Her words begin to linger. Her absence feels heavier than it should. Things that never used to bother him suddenly matter. That's because once a woman touches a man emotionally, she's no longer just someone he likes. She becomes someone who influences how he feels about himself and his life. A man doesn't easily surrender emotional control. He's trained to manage, suppress, and compartmentalize his feelings, but emotional attachment breaks through those walls slowly and persistently. He starts caring in ways that surprise him. He checks his phone more often, not because he's desperate, but because he's hoping he pays attention to her tone, her mood, her energy, because her emotional state begins to matter to him. If she's happy, he feels lighter. If she's distant, something feels off. Even if everything else in his life is going well, once attachment forms, a man's priorities begin to shift. He starts rearranging his schedule, his habits, even his goals, without consciously deciding to do so. He makes room for her, not just physically, but emotionally. He listens more closely. He remembers small details he used to overlook. He becomes more present in conversations, more thoughtful in his responses. That's not strategy, that's emotional investment. A man who is emotionally attached is no longer operating on impulse, he's operating on care. Emotional attachment also brings vulnerability, and that's where the internal conflict begins. He wants to stay strong, but he also wants to stay connected. He doesn't want to appear weak, but he doesn't want to lose her either. So he struggles quietly. He may pull back at times, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares more than he's comfortable admitting. Emotional attachment makes a man aware that he has something to lose, and that awareness can be intimidating. As attachment deepens, a man begins to protect the connection. He becomes cautious with his actions and his words because he understands that what he has is fragile. He's more selective about who he lets influence him. He distances himself from situations that could jeopardize the bond. He doesn't want chaos where he's found peace. Emotional attachment teaches a man responsibility, not because someone demanded it, but because his heart has chosen it. When a man is emotionally attached to a woman, he starts seeing her as part of his future, even if he hasn't put language to it yet. He imagines her reactions, considers her feelings, and measures his choices against the impact they might have on her. That's when attachment turns into depth, because a man doesn't emotionally attach unless a woman has reached a place in him that feels safe, meaningful, and irreplaceable. And once she's there, his inner world is never quite the same again. When fear enters a man's heart, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come in the form of panic or weakness. It arrives quietly, disguised as caution, hesitation, and deep thought. When a man can't stop thinking about a woman, fear shows up not because he doubts her, but because he recognizes her value. Fear is born the moment he realizes that losing her would cost him something he may never find again. And that realization changes how he moves through the world. A man who feels nothing has nothing to protect. But a man who feels deeply becomes aware of risk. He starts weighing his actions more carefully. He thinks before he speaks. He replays moments in his head, wondering if he said the wrong thing or missed an opportunity to show up better. That's fear at work, not the kind that paralyzes, but the kind that sharpens awareness. He doesn't want to make mistakes because mistakes now feel expensive. One wrong move could create distance, and distance is what he fears most. This fear forces a man to confront his own limitations. He begins to see where he falls short, where his habits could cost him the woman occupying his thoughts. He notices his impatience, his pride, his emotional avoidance. And for the first time, those flaws bother him, not because someone criticized him, but because he understands what's at stake. Fear pushes him toward growth. It challenges him to become more consistent, more honest, more emotionally available than he's ever been before. As fear deepens, a man becomes protective of the connection. He doesn't want unnecessary interference. He guards the bond from outside noise, from careless opinions, from situations that could cause misunderstandings. He becomes selective about who he listens to because not everyone understands the value of what he's building. This protection isn't about control, it's about preservation. He knows how rare it is to find someone who feels like home, and he doesn't want to mishandle that gift. Fear also awakens a sense of responsibility. A man begins to realize that his presence or absence matters. His consistency matters. His effort matters. He understands that love isn't just about feeling, but about showing up even when it's uncomfortable. That awareness pushes him toward commitment. Even if he's not ready to say the word out loud, he starts thinking long term, imagining consequences, considering futures that include her in them. At its core, fear is the proof of depth. A man doesn't fear losing what he never valued. Fear only exists when something precious is on the line. When a man can't stop thinking about a woman and fear enters his heart, it's because she has touched a part of him that feels irreplaceable. That fear reshapes him, disciplines him, and guides his actions. It turns careless men into cautious ones, distant men into intentional ones, and uncertain men into men who finally understand what they stand to lose and what they must do to keep it. When a man begins to protect what he values, it shows up in his behavior long before it shows up in his words. Protection is instinctive. It isn't something a man announces or performs. It's something he lives. When a woman becomes important to him, his mindset shifts from casual involvement to careful stewardship. He starts treating the connection as something fragile and rare, something that requires intention. This kind of protection doesn't come from jealousy or control. It comes from respect and recognition. He understands that what he has is meaningful, and meaningful things deserve to be guarded. A man who is protective becomes more aware of his environment. He notices who has access to her, who influences her, and what affects her peace. Not because he wants ownership, but because he wants safety, emotional, mental, and sometimes even spiritual. He doesn't want her hurt, misunderstood, or taken for granted. He listens more closely to her concerns. He pays attention to what unsettles her. He steps in not to dominate, but to support. Protection at its healthiest is about presence and reliability, not control. As protection grows, a man becomes more disciplined. He starts setting boundaries for himself. He avoids situations that could create doubt or insecurity. He doesn't flirt carelessly or entertain distractions that could compromise trust. Even when no one is watching, he moves with integrity because he knows his actions reflect how much he values her. Protection makes him accountable to something greater than impulse. He understands that trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, and he doesn't want to be the reason that trust is damaged. Protective behavior also reveals itself in how a man speaks about a woman when she's not around. He doesn't allow disrespect in conversations. He corrects assumptions. He defends her character, not aggressively, but firmly. He doesn't need to prove anything. His consistency does that for him. When others test boundaries or speak carelessly, he draws the line. That's how you know a man is serious, because protection doesn't require an audience. It requires conviction. A man who protects what he values also becomes emotionally present. He checks in not out of obligation, but out of concern. He wants to know how she's doing, what she's feeling, and whether she's okay. He doesn't disappear when things get difficult. Instead, he leans in. He understands that real connection isn't just about shared joy. It's about standing steady during uncertainty. His protection shows up in consistency, in follow-through, in showing up when it matters most. Protection also shapes how a man plans his future. He starts making choices that consider her well-being. He thinks about stability, direction, and growth. He understands that protection isn't only about defending against harm, but about creating an environment where she can thrive. A man who truly values a woman wants to be a source of peace, not confusion, safety, not stress. And when protection becomes part of who he is, it's clear that his feelings have moved beyond attraction into something deeper, grounded, and intentional. When love begins to transform a man, the change is rarely loud, but it is always undeniable. Transformation doesn't start with grand gestures or public declarations. It starts internally, where no one else can see. A man who has truly been touched by a woman he can't stop thinking about begins to see himself differently. He becomes more aware of who he is and who he needs to become. Love holds up a mirror, and in that reflection, he sees both his potential and his shortcomings, and that awareness becomes the seed of change. He starts questioning his old habits. The things he once tolerated about himself no longer sit right. His excuses feel weaker. His comfort zones feel smaller. Love pushes him toward responsibility, not because he is forced, but because he wants to be worthy of what he feels. He begins to understand that growth isn't about perfection. It's about effort and intention. And so quietly, he starts doing better. He becomes more patient, more consistent, more emotionally available, even when it doesn't come naturally. Transformation shows up in how he treats people, not just her. A man in love becomes softer without losing strength. He listens more. He reacts less impulsively. He learns to communicate instead of withdrawing. Love teaches him emotional language he never bothered to learn before. He becomes more considerate, more aware of how his actions impact others. That's because love expands his capacity for empathy. He starts caring beyond himself, and that shift changes everything. A transformed man also begins to think long term. His vision stretches beyond the present moment. He starts valuing stability over excitement, meaning over ego. He thinks about legacy, not just pleasure. Love matures him. It teaches him that real fulfillment doesn't come from constant chasing, but from building something that lasts. He becomes more intentional with his time, his energy, and his choices because he understands that what he's building matters. Love also humbles a man. It teaches him that he doesn't have all the answers, and that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's connection. He learns to apologize sincerely, to admit when he's wrong, and to grow from it. He realizes that strength isn't about control, but about consistency and care. This humility deepens his character and strengthens his relationships. When love transforms a man, it doesn't erase who he is. It refines him, it sharpens his values, and aligns his actions with his heart. He becomes someone who not only feels deeply, but acts responsibly on those feelings. And that transformation, born from love, is one of the clearest signs that a woman has touched him in a way that will forever shape who he becomes. When love fully settles into a man's heart, it begins its work on him long before it changes anything around him. The transformation starts internally in the quiet places where identity is formed. A man may still have the same job, the same routine, the same responsibilities, but internally he is no longer the same person. Love reshapes his priorities, his discipline, and his sense of purpose. It forces him to confront the man he has been and the man he needs to become. And that internal shift is always the most difficult part because it requires honesty. A man in love begins to see life through a different lens. His decisions stop being only about what feels good in the moment and start being about what will last. He becomes more aware of consequences, not just for himself, but for the woman who now lives in his thoughts and heart. Recklessness loses its appeal. Shortcuts don't feel satisfying anymore. Love introduces responsibility, and responsibility matures a man faster than anything else. He starts asking himself harder questions about his direction, his consistency, and his integrity. This transformation also shows up in how he handles conflict and discomfort. Where he once avoided emotional conversations, he now tries to stay present. Where he once shut down, he now attempts to explain himself. Love challenges his emotional habits. It exposes his defenses and asks him to grow beyond them. He realizes that walking away is easy, but staying, listening, and working through things requires strength. And strength, he learns, isn't silence, it's effort. As love works on him, a man becomes more disciplined, not because he's controlled, but because he's motivated. He wants to protect what he feels, and that means protecting his behavior. He becomes more mindful of how he speaks, how he reacts, and how he shows up. He understands that love is not just an emotion, but a responsibility that requires consistency. His word begins to matter more to him. Follow through becomes personal. He doesn't want to be the reason trust breaks or hope fades. Love also reshapes how a man sees himself. He begins to believe he is capable of more than he once thought. He wants to be dependable, respected, and emotionally safe. That desire pushes him toward self-improvement. He may work harder, plan smarter, or become more focused on stability and growth. Not because someone demanded it, but because love inspired it. He wants to be someone she can rely on, someone who adds value rather than stress. Internally transformed men move differently. They carry themselves with more intention. Their confidence becomes quieter but stronger. They don't need validation from everywhere because they are fulfilled by one meaningful connection. Love grounds them. It teaches them patience and long-term thinking. They stop chasing temporary highs and start building something solid. That internal grounding changes how they navigate the world. Eventually, once a man is transformed inside, his life begins to follow. His relationships improve. His choices align. His path becomes clearer. But none of that happens before the internal work is done. Love always starts on the inside. It refines character before it changes circumstances. And when a man allows love to transform him internally, the life he builds afterward reflects that growth naturally, without force, without pretense, and without needing to be explained.